What are your thoughts on AI's actual ability to provide meaningful feedback on like human behaviors? And I say in real time, it doesn't have to be in real time, but I know that that's part of your background as well.
So I've been working in the space for 15 plus years now, and there's been solutions that can understand human behavior from an AI perspective, if you will, for at least the last 15 years. And there's been academic research going on for a long time before that. And the real-time component is an interesting part, because I think the caveat with real time is that it is very computationally expensive. So when you think about providing feedback in real time, it's on average, 10 times more expensive than providing feedback with a delay. So you have to, as a business leader, really think about, what are the use cases where real time gives an unbelievable advantage for your product and for your users, because you're going to have to be charging a lot more in order to have a profitability with a real-time solution with today's technology. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so is that mostly because of like the server side processing cost and how quickly you kind of have to get things from one end processed, analyzed, and then like regurgitated back to the user in real time?
So it depends a lot on your stack, if you will, your technical stack. So if you can do the processing at the end user device on a phone, for example, there's ways to make it less expensive. But in a traditional big enterprise approach of you are streaming data from a data center to the cloud, processing, sending it back down to end users who often are on thin clients in corporate environments that don't have local compute capabilities, then that's where things get very, very expensive in an enterprise setting. But what's interesting is, despite all of that, the accuracy, the impact of these solutions on a whole variety of measures of human behavior are pretty accurate and pretty accurate to a point of being useful and predictive, right? So there's a whole variety of use cases where AI has been wonderfully efficient and effective long before the sort of generative AI revolution, which I think has actually impacted a lot more of the quote unquote verbal aspect of the conversation than the nonverbal. So the ability to understand the words in the conversation has improved greatly with some of these new technologies. But the nonverbal aspect has been leveraging a different approach from a technical perspective that's been pretty powerful for at least the last 10 years.
And by nonverbal, are you talking more about like the vocal components of speech, or are you also talking about like body language and those behaviors?
So eye contact, head motion, leaning, nodding, tone of voice, intonation, speaking rate, everything except for the meaning of the words, if you will.
It's so interesting because obviously that's been our big focus at Virtual Sapiens since we started, and the generative AI revolution, I like that you called it that, was so interesting because all of a sudden it became table stakes to have the words also be analyzed, because it also was like so easy now through APIs to like loop these things in. But the nonverbal behavioral stuff's been a lot more interesting, I think, at least for us, to explore, because we do leverage actually on client, on device compute power. And so the real-time component for us has been like, it hasn't immediately broken the bank. Like we haven't had to raise tens of millions of dollars just to get out the door, which has been great. But it's just fascinating to see things continue to evolve in this space.
It's become interesting because you now have the optionality as a product designer to decide which stream of information you want to access, right? And especially in near real time, you can now get the words in the conversation with low latency along with the nonverbals. So you get to decide which of these information streams are most valuable for the use cases that you're supporting, and that's a big change from how things were a couple of years ago.
What are your thoughts on? Because, there's the application of using this technology as a coach, right? To receive feedback on yourself. And then there's the kind of everyone's infatuation with being able to like read the room and decode because you said something earlier that I think is really interesting and important. And it's that there's a difference a little bit between someone's intended message or their like the intention behind their communication, and then how they actually come across, right? Like that's always at the root of all of it. So if you're using AI in real time on a video call, for example, to deduce what other people might be thinking or feeling, but it's not like, like how do you reconcile that with the fact that like you can't know their intention?
And it gets even more, there's another layer of complication with this because there's the goals of the individual in the conversation. So like, I have a worldview of how I'm thinking. I have a worldview of how I'm presenting myself. I have a perspective on how you're receiving this conversation. And then I have a goal in mind of what I'm trying to communicate, right? And what's really interesting when you think about an AI coach is which of those sort of personas are you coaching on, right? And what are you training the AI on in terms of the truth? Because the quote unquote facts of a conversation may be totally irrelevant to the perception of how things are going, right? And if the person on the other side of the conversation perceives the conversation is going really well, it doesn't actually matter if you think you're stumbling through everything, right? So in some sense, like what's best for an AI coach? Is it the facts of your speaking rate is higher than ideal in a conversation like this? It's you're coming across as nervous. Or is it your body language is presenting in such a way that you come across as confident, and that is a stronger signal than your speaking rate being too quickly of being nervous, and therefore the person on the other end is actually receiving this as an expert who knows what they're talking about, right? And in which of those sort of aspects of a conversation should an AI coach be focused on? And that's the really interesting part of inserting another entity into a conversation. And humans are used to human interactions, right? And do you build an AI that is that interacts with you in a way a human does, or do you purposely build an AI that is focused on other aspects of the conversation that a human isn't as aware of as the conversation is happening? Does that make sense? Yeah.
I mean, and because we've had to put a lot of thought into this, obviously, at Virtual Sapiens too. And like our view on it is if our AI can be a mirror that we hold up to say, like, these were the behaviors you exhibited on the call, we like to leave it up to the user to integrate and to reflect on the feedback that they've received and whether or not it aligns with those goals and those intentions, right? Like here's the way you're showing up. Here are some of the perception-based like communication trends that those might affect. Like, is that what you were going for? Because if it wasn't, then then you can start to maybe think about changing certain behaviors in certain contexts. And then the other piece that we do is we really do encourage a human coach to be in the loop, so that the human coach can help with some of that like synthesis.
It's been interesting to see sort of the branding and product development in the space in the last couple of years, because a lot of the companies in the early days, quote unquote, were branding this type of approach as emotion AI. And it was about recognizing the emotions that humans were presenting in a conversation. And I'm a big fan of the fact that the industry has moved towards understanding human behavior, right? And it's much more about what is happening in the interaction, what are the behaviors, and leaving the human to be the expert to decide what are the emotions that I am trying to express or that I'm feeling within this interaction.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's been such a big evolution for us as well. Like from the beginning, I was very reticent to use any of the AI that had already been developed in terms of like, detecting emotions and like, this is the expression you're making, blah, blah, blah. Because I was like, there's such a difference. There's such a leap for the expressed emotion or the emotion detected, for lack of a better term, and then the felt sense of emotion. Right? And I was like, the last thing we're going to do also is tell someone like that they should be smiling more, or, and so we don't reflect back any emotions. We just we'll give you like a facial expression variation reading. And so you can see, my facial expression's varying a lot in this part of the conversation. And then it went completely flat or neutral or stayed happy, or, it's up to you to develop that awareness. But we can reflect back on the variation, just not on the emotion. Yeah.
It gets back to that question of, what are the strengths that the human is bringing to the conversation, and how do you leverage those as a AI tool builder, so that you're not distracting folks with misinformation relating to how they're quote unquote supposed to be feeling, which may not be actionable or particularly useful in the moment, right?
I could keep, I'll go to the next question, but I could talk to you about this all day.